scriptures, the Genesis story of the patriarchs and Paul's struggles with himself and his position in the world, and Jesus teaching and preaching to those who follow him. So what to say about the Rebecca story? It certainly is from long ago, and I guess we can compare it shades of Miles Standish and John Alden, since it's Independence Day, instead of Isaac going out to ask permission of the father himself and to make any connection with his bride-to-be. He sends someone else out, and all works well. I don't know, ladies, if we can forgive the ring in the nose, but the psalm made it very nice that she comes with the gold cloth and is respected by all, and Isaac loved her. And in fact, as we know from the beginning, God's plan was through the patriarchs and their wives that God's people would inherit the earth. So, that said, we look at the deep plan beneath our lives today. Now this week, for our lesson with Kinyorwanden and with Emmanuel, I think I understood from him that he tended cows back in Congo and made cheese and sold milk. So we got in the car and went out and found a dairy near Meridian, and we were able to go into the driveway and get out just as easy as you could please and look at the milking barn, a modern, lovely building with two people doing the work. And I don't know, there must have been a dozen cows who were finishing their milking. The gates opened and they all processed out together. And I thought, well, done, but here come the next down the line. And each one goes in to the stall all the way down the line, and they're washed, and the milkers are attached, and the process continues. Just as by plan. And then as we left and looked at these, tons and tons and tons and tons of hay, this is a big operation, as I guess all dairies are nowadays. There were cattle in the far enclosure who were just wending their way to be the next go-round. So within this modern dairy facility, there's a deep pattern that's being followed even by those animals who are the essential part of that dairy. And so for us too, what is our deep pattern? What is it that we do and do? And maybe we fight against it, but if we accept it, how is it that our lives can be lived to the fullest? So in our story of the gospel, our build-up today, if you remember, is it's been kind of tough for the disciples to hear what Jesus has to say. There's going to be discord, and they're going to go out like sheep among the wolves. And so their work is difficult. There's few laborers, there's a great harvest. But today, we get this news of the burden is light. And so, again, Jesus is preaching not just to the disciples, but to those of the time. And so our first look is, well, what was the burden of everybody? What was that heavy thing they carried with them? And we might imagine it was that body of oppressive rules, the rules of perfection, and the Pharisaic condemnations of those who couldn't quite live up to the rules. Jesus substitutes the two laws of love God and love your neighbor for the, well, somebody counted up 613 rules that had to be followed. I suppose some of them contradictory. And only someone who dedicated their lives very strictly, like the Pharisees, would manage to think they were living in perfection. And what would their life have really been like if all they did was follow the rules of what they thought was the law? So an easy yoke is our symbol of the day. We know what a yoke is. We see those old pictures, the oxen pulling, two of them together. And this was the symbol that the commentaries almost all talked about. Often when you read the different commentaries, they'll go here or there in the next place. But this lesson focuses on the yoke. And as we heard, Jesus as the carpenter, Jesus who in the hymn skilled at the plane and the lathe. We might talk about him picking this as the symbol because he maybe was in the business. And so we can imagine if Jesus was making a yoke, it would be a good one. And I don't think about this too much, but they have to fit right. We don't want to be abrading the animal. We want them to work. We want the animal to do the animal's work as easily as possible. And so we can imagine that this yoke is easy, which is translated in another Bible version, this yoke is good to bear. This yoke helps us. And in fact, you can imagine before yokes were invented, all these ropes and straps and whatnot probably had a bad effect on the animals who were doing the work. So the yoke was a great improvement. So that's all in the past now. The yoke of the law, and the Pharisees talked about carrying the law with your yoke. But what about today? What is our yoke? And if we look, bringing it up to post-Jesus time, Paul talks about that burden of sin he carries, his difficulties with that failure. He's always trying to still live into the life he knows God is calling him to live, and he's failing. And so he wants to do the right thing, but he just can't do it. I don't know, can anybody besides me relate to that? I mean, life from childhood is a struggle to learn how to do things right. Infants are eager to learn. That's why Jesus mentions them. They're ready to listen to something new and watch how to do something right and try to do it. And of course, infancy is a time for failure after failure. And so, all those baby sounds that you hear finally ending up into a word and then another word, there's months and months and months of failure to say the sentence, and then, voila, success. So of course, failure breeds success. But now that we're adults, like the Pharisees, what is our attitude toward failure? Are we happy with failure? Oh, good, I messed that one up again. I'm sure I can learn something. Well, that's not me. That's not me. Do we try harder then and fail again? Yeah. And Paul berates himself and we'll see this in various of his epistles. But again, he always comes back to the fact that Jesus and Jesus' message liberates him from the scourge of that vicious circle of self-condemnation. And not to mention all the others that like to condemn as well. As we look at the story, he accepts that we're weary. Come, all of you who are weary. And then talk about, oh, you just get so tired and what a bad attitude. You're tired, you're weary, but come. And so there's no explanation of condemnation and how you're failing and doing things wrong. But with that said, is Jesus' message to take away the burden Well, no. The burden is given. The burden is the deep pattern of our lives. And I like to call it, this is our purpose in life. What would our lives be like if we didn't have any reason for being here? I guess we can imagine lying on the beach in the beautiful sunshine with the breezes all the time. And yes, that's nice to imagine. But I can pretty much guarantee that everybody who was there for, well, I don't know if you could stand it a week, you would be thinking about there must be something better than I can be doing. It's basic to our abundant life, our fulfillment in life, to have purpose. We don't want to just live an empty existence. But we're faced with failure. We have a purpose, we don't quite get there. Or maybe we're way apart from our purpose. And so, just like those children in the marketplace, one way that we can approach that is through apathy. The flute's being played, but I don't want to get involved. I'm just not going to dance. I might look stupid. I might like it too much, and then I'll have to quit, and then I'll be upset. Or weep when it's time to mourn. Well, I don't want to go there. I'm just not going to go to that funeral. Funerals just do me in. I can't let my emotions come out. So apathy is a danger for us to really fulfill our purpose. We need to come to terms with our burdens. We need to embrace our purpose. Now, if you notice, we missed 5 verses in our passage today. And in those verses, Jesus talks about having gone around to Capernaum and to the Gerasenes and etc. And he says, woe to you, those cities that I went to, and if you're not following or being able to embrace the message, woe to you. It's going to be worse for you than it was for Sodom, which of course is the big bad city of the Hebrew Testament. And why is that? Again, the gospel, Jesus' life, the gospel has come near. In fact, the gospel is here. And if we just close our hearts and minds to the gospel, well, that goes against the deep pattern that God has planned for us in our lives. We're not going to be happy. It's going to be a woeful existence that we follow. Another way to approach the gospel is to condemn. And so that's why that little passage, and all they said, here's John. He was just as pious and ascetic as possible. And then here was Jesus, who lived the full life and embraced everybody, whoever they were. And so the Pharisees didn't like either one of them. Whichever way you try, you're wrong. So we can't condemn and try to keep ourselves righteous and look at that terrible world out there that is failing, failing, failing. So, what are we to do? As C.S. Lewis notes, Jesus says he wants a kind of person, not this record of good deeds. Not so much that. I mean, good deeds are wonderful, but instead of this gold star list of commandments obeyed, Jesus calls for love. Instead of all the rules and just focusing on, I'm okay because I've followed that rule at this moment, it's, what am I called to do out in the world? Rules are to help us do things correctly, but our purpose is to love God and our neighbor. Have our lives been sated with love? Is the world overfull of love? No more need for Christian offerings? And so, the burden we bear is the ever-continuing need in God's plan for each of us to realize our purpose each moment on earth, our purpose to love. And our purpose is not to condemn the world, but to embrace it in all its imperfections and to keep working for the right. And Jesus indeed helps us bear this burden by accepting us in love, regardless of our failures. So let us build the kingdom by doing likewise. In Jesus' name, amen.